In the Senegalese capital of Dakar, representatives of more than 150 countries are gathering to discuss the future of education around the world. Outside, 1,000 children are protesting on behalf of everyone, everywhere, still denied an education. This meeting will determine whether the children's voices are heard after 60 years of global good intentions.
Everyone has the right to education.
This momentous declaration still has no significance for the 72 million children who cannot attend school.
Education is the foundation for economic and social development.
Such eloquent speeches still have no meaning for the 774 million adults unable to read or write.
To emancipate women completely requires equal access to education.
Fine words still have no value for the 1 in 4 women, 1 in 3 in developing countries, who remain illiterate. It's the second time an Education Summit meeting has been held in Dakar. The first was held in the year 2000, organised by the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organisation, UNESCO. It ended with an historic pronouncement that there must be education for all, and by 2015. At the end of 2007, halfway to the target year, this meeting was called to assess progress and examine what's needed to ensure success.
We cannot afford to fail.
This programme will look at the impact that's being made by the drive for education for all. We'll visit some of the remotest communities in the world where classrooms are being opened for the first time. We'll see how cultural barriers are being brought down to reach a new generation of students. And we'll meet one young girl, typical of so many, who must work instead of learn. We'll also follow the summit meeting itself and find out what happened at the end of 3 days of prolonged argument and debate. Is education for all destined to become just another piece of rhetoric?
If, of course, countries were to adopt stronger policies, and if donors and countries were to provide more resources, then, of course, it is possible that better results could be obtained.
The Global Campaign for Education are determined that we cannot wait anymore, and we cannot let the governments to wait anymore and keep us on waiting and breaking their promises forever.
A 4-hour drive from the nearest stretch of road, on a plateau 14,000 feet above sea level, lies the village of Korsok in the Himalayas of Himachal Pradesh in northern India. Cut off completely for 4 months in the winter, it's an example of the scale of the challenges facing the delivery of education for all. The small community has grown around a Buddhist monastery, and there never has been any secular education in the village, until today. This schoolroom is opening to children for the first time, but their parents are just as keen to get through the door, so there's little time for ceremony. Almost the entire village has turned out for the occasion and share in the first ever formal lesson. Until today, the only education was provided by the Lama from the monastery.
Students in the school is very important because it is like a foundation to the students. The students learn so many things about the world, and they will do very well for their village and their society.
Could you ask the children what subjects they're looking forward to learning?
Hindi.
Yes. Any of them know what they want to do when they leave school? This basic education is being provided not by the state, but by a charity called Pragya, which works to protect the Himalayas. The charity realises that education is the best way of supporting the mountain communities. The children do have access to a state school, but they would have to board and have to pay, so parents have little choice but to keep them at home. Lessons will be held here for 2 hours every day.
अभी ये पढ़ना तो इंग्लिश और बुद्धि सब तो लैंग्वेज ज़रूरी है मेरे सब जानना ज़रूरी है हमें क्योंकि हिंदी भी बहुत आवश्यकता है हमारे लिए मैं सबसे पहले बच्चों लोगों को ये सीखना चाहता हूँ कि ABC और ये पूरा अकाउंट और ये हिंदी का क भी वगैरह ऐसे सीख फिर आगे बढ़ते जाएगा.
Some of the children here are in the full-time care of the monastery because their parents are nomads and don't want to expose them to the rigours of the winter. The nomads, called the Changpas, are currently a short distance from the village, but getting ready to move on to find fresh grazing. Again, the only education available is in a boarding school, an even more unrealistic option for nomads. Pragya came up with a simple solution. If the children have to move, then the school will have to move with them.
मैं बचपन में कभी स्कूल में नहीं पढ़ा सर तो अभी इस वजह से बहुत गरीब वालों से बहुत हम लोग बहुत दुखी में पढ़ाई था तो इस वजह से इस टाइम से आप लोगों ने स्कूल इतना हमारे गांव में आकर इस आप लोगों ने बहुत मदद दिया कि बहुत हमारा बहुत खुशी में रहा है सर माता पिता सब खुशी में बैठे रहे सर
The Changpa's language is Boti, but no one can read or write it, including the tribal elder, or Goba. Korsok and the Changpas demonstrate that no community is too isolated and no lifestyle is too challenging to be left without an education. That's why campaigners use the slogan, "There are no excuses." Education for all, however, is more than providing a schoolroom and a teacher. It's defined by 6 aims known as the Dhaka goals. Expand and improve early childhood care and education. Ensure all children have access to and complete primary education. Ensure all young people and adults have access to learning and life skills programs. Achieve a 50% improvement in levels of adult literacy, especially for women. Eliminate gender disparities and achieve gender equality in primary and secondary education. Improve the quality of education and achieve measurable learning outcomes. There are 2 groups monitoring progress. Each launched their assessment in contrasting style in Dhaka. The Global Monitoring Report Team, set up by UNESCO, staged a press conference with a Senegalese education minister. The Global Campaign for Education, created by aid charities, held a demonstration with a Senegalese singing star.
Education is one of the keys to fight against poverty. I'm very happy to be with you and with the children of Africa.
Both events, however, had a similar message. There's a long way to go, but a great deal is being achieved.
Our report painted a mixed picture, frankly. It painted a picture of significant progress, particularly towards certain goals and in certain regions. And the very encouraging finding that the most rapid progress has been in countries such as Senegal, where we currently are, but other surrounding countries in Africa, which are in fact the furthest from the goals, but which are making the most rapid progress.
I'm positive because one can see some progress. Most important is the poor people in poor countries started realizing the value of education for their own empowerment, for justice, social and economic justice, which was not the case 5 years or 10 years ago. The things are changing so rapidly.
Uganda is one country where there's been rapid progress, although there are problems in assessing exactly what's been achieved. There's no doubt the government has made education a priority. Here in Karamoja, a remote region in the northeast of the country, that meant overcoming historical hostility. After World War II, tribal elders literally buried a pen in a ceremony to symbolise their rejection of literacy. It was writing that took children away from their work on the land. It was writing that took men away from their families when they were encouraged or coerced into signing up for the army. As these elders remember, after that they only learned about cattle and land. The elders, however, have given their full backing to a project called Alternative Basic Education for Karamoja, or ABEC. It demonstrates that education can be adapted to lifestyle and that literacy and numeracy can be rewarding. 12-year-old Lakong is able to fit learning around other commitments, which start with helping his mother and continue with looking after the family cattle. In between, he takes part in a 1.5-hour lesson just outside his village in what's called a learning centre. Lakong's mother, Senegal, recognises he's getting opportunities that were denied her. Lakong wants to continue his education at a primary school 5 kilometres from his village. Nearly 3/4 of the pupils here were brought into education by ABEC. 18-year-old Mark Lolly is the project's greatest success so far, completely changing his life and his aspirations. Like most young boys, he spent his day tending goats and cattle, but his only education was in using a gun and raiding rival villages. Then one day he came across the learning centre.
In the morning I just went out of the village. I had a chance to get the people under the tree. They were learning. The teacher, he gave me a slate, a chalk. He wrote my name there. He told me to practice how to write. So I practiced. For only 2 days. I knew how to write my name. That's the first thing which made me to be at school.
2P6.
Mark moved on to formal education and developed a gift for science. This former cattle raider is now looking forward to university, possibly to train as a doctor and return to his home region.
With having people like Mark originating from such a region, being planted back at home in their communities, educating their people, cause a very big change. It will open understanding of very many things, how things run maybe in our country and so on, and it will encourage others to move. It will plant ambitions in young people, and it will just turn the region upside down.
2 generations after it was buried, tribal elders held a second symbolic ceremony and unearthed the pen. The Ugandan government estimates the number of primary school children has tripled in recent years to 7 million. Other countries where there's been a significant expansion in primary education include Cameroon, Botswana and Tanzania. Out of Africa, Oxfam International has singled out countries including Sri Lanka, Costa Rica, Thailand and Cuba for achieving what it describes as a breakthrough in basic education, achieving quality and equality. Primary education has become the priority for almost all developing nations, mainly because it's also one of the Millennium Goals set by the United Nations. Another shared goal is gender equality, but this is proving elusive in the classroom. Gender parity was supposed to be achieved by 2005, but it's estimated that nearly 100 countries won't even achieve it by 2015. A girl's chance of getting to school and staying there often depends on the attitude and determination of the staff and head teacher. This school in Rufisque, in the Senegalese coast, is a sub-Saharan rarity. It has more girls than boys. It's given a second chance to girls like Abby.
Elle est une de mes élèves qui était dans une des écoles de la ville de Bargny. Alors, il s'est trouvé qu'en cours d'année scolaire, elle est tombée malade, gravement malade d'ailleurs, parce qu'elle a perdu beaucoup de temps quand même au lit. Alors, quand elle est revenue, son maître a refusé de l'accepter en classe. Il a très très mal agi, parce que c'est ce que je disais dernièrement, même si elle ne peut pas suivre, il devait la faire doubler. Peut-être qu'on ne pouvait pas l'accepter pour passer en classe supérieure parce qu'elle a accusé du retard, mais rien n'empêchait à cet enseignant-là de lui demander de doubler la classe, de reprendre la classe, mais pas de l'exclure.
ba ma màggee doon ministre jàppale samay mbokk bari ñëpp di jàppale ñëpp surtout samay parents mais bu ma màggee waa Bargny li ma leen di defal mooy bëgguma kenn ku sonn bëgguma benn xale buy traîner di taxawaale ci dëkk bi.
Outside, Abby's mother, Yugu, who had heard about our filming, was keen to talk to us.
Gis naa ci njariñ parce que njàng mi am na njariñ parce que ministre yu jigéen yi mu ngi fi hôpitaux yi boo demee di nga fi gis jigéen mais jigéen ñi daal am nañu seen waar ci njàng mi parce que njariñ li bari na trop ci jigéen waaw man mii xam ne maa yaay Abi sax réccu naa li ma bàyyi école man.
In most cases, however, parents are not so encouraging. The school also wanted us to meet a girl called Mambour, who was found selling homemade biscuits outside the gates. She was brought inside and given a desk. But she's now gone absent. Her teacher and head teacher want to find out why and decide to visit her home. They find her on the street preparing vegetables. They discover that Mambour's mother, a single parent, has told her to stay away and look after the home while she's out working. She tells the head teacher, however, that she desperately wants to get back to school.
Je vais continuer encore à négocier. Si elle accepte, ça va. Si elle n'accepte pas, je sais que je n'y pourrai rien, mais je ferai quand même le maximum pour qu'elle la laisse venir à l'école.
The school holds extra lessons in the afternoon for girls who are compelled to help in the home. It's hoped Mambour's mother can be persuaded to let her attend one of these classes after she's finished her chores. Unfortunately, not many schools are willing to be so flexible to help girls. Some are not even providing the basics. Some of the widest gender disparities appear in the Central African Republic, Chad, Pakistan and Yemen, where for every 100 boys, only 80 girls or less start school. There is increasing help for girls who missed out on education. In Uganda, this girl has been welcomed back to school at the age of 19. Betty Nakut was forced into marriage and ordered to give up education. Her husband, however, has since been killed in a cattle raid in Karamojo.
Hello, P3. Hello, teacher. What is the day today? 1st October 2007. 2007. Good. Sit down, Betty.
I ko di lajlaja tana da ko na mo na re ngi mo no to mo ma wo no daga na to na burta rukta da kainget ay na da marbe akoro to kana abu akoro ero no na lo na wo kre na to na burama gam no to binete noy Dio potonok no thing borro. Ko parta na kan ko tera ki bin te madang mi na do ya ka lo school. Tana da ko kun.
Betty is determined to carry on, despite pressure from her husband's family and laughter from her classmates.
Ba cha to kyan tar ba ine kyanar nge de kyanar. Mam ro ba. Ka tara tar ngi le chida. E panene tor bang ka to te kya ka kilene ni kan. E cham to ke sha ya ki rom lakina bala ke chi mi ke de mona odio my school. Ana cha ya karna ite yo ngaren bas. O cham no de night kor patana te ke roma. I sham da nga kilio mana no ruera madam ne atata mingode.
In northern India, courses aimed at girls are run by the charity Pragya. And this learning centre in Keelong provides equipment and computers not available in most secondary schools in the state of Himachal Pradesh.
क्योंकि आज की डेट में कंप्यूटर बहुत ज़रूरी है, हर फील्ड में कंप्यूटर का यूज़ हो रहा है. फॉर एग्जांपल बैंक, ऑफिस एंड रेलवे, एयरलाइंस. मेरे मम्मी पापा बहुत अच्छे हैं, कभी किसी चीज़ के लिए उन्होंने रोका टोका नहीं है. मतलब मैं जो करना चाहती हूँ उन्होंने मुझे मतलब करने दिया है.
Another problem is keeping girls and boys in school. The Global Campaign for Education has found that in 50 developing countries, half of all children drop out before completing primary school. In Rafisk, the children have produced their own play to reinforce the message that they should all stay at school. Here, the child who studies, despite parental opposition, goes on to secondary education and then university in Paris, returning a sophisticated graduate, much to the shock of his father. However, the most effective way of encouraging children into school is reaching out to parents, who may not understand the advantages of basic education. Studies and experience have shown that once adults start reading and writing, they want their children to learn. Despite this, improving adult literacy is one of the most neglected of the 6 Dhaka goals. The 774 million figure for the number of adults who lack literacy around the world has dropped by 100 million over the last 5 years. But incredibly, all but 2 million of those have been in one country, China. In West Africa, ActionAid has developed a programme called Reflect, which makes reading and writing relevant to everyday life. This class is in Nyumbel, one of the poorest districts of Dhaka, and it starts with a session on healthcare. They list the most common diseases that affect people in the area, such as malaria and diarrhoea, and then discuss where to find treatments, from health centres for those who can afford it to herbalists for those who can't. The class then moves on to learn how to read and write the key words they've been discussing. Sibiru is malaria.
At the beginning they can't write, but little by little they learn how to write, how to read. But Reflect is not only to write and to read, it is also about awareness raising, about discussion, and about solving immediate problems for better living conditions. It is a woman who takes care of the education of girls, of boys, to take care of the family and also the daily life of the family.
Understanding numbers has opened up new opportunities for these women, especially with the increasing availability of mobile phones.
te léegi bañ commencé suñu njàng mi ba léegi amal na ma njëriñ ñun ñëpp sax la amal njëriñ ndax léegi dañuy dem ci cabine composé sa bopp woo ci sa téléphone te kenn du la xamal te dañ doon dem boo demee télécentre dangay dem borom télécentre bi nga ne ko kaay composel ma te loolu yëpp amatul léegi mën naa bind sama tur mën naa ci daal lu bare bare amal na ma njëriñ te loo xam ne sama dund yaakaaruma koon sax sama dund ndax kuy dund.
waaw gis nga ko affaire gox bi ñu doon def yëpp njàngamee tax ñu xam ko ndox mu salte mi ak sibiru bi ak loolu yëpp ñu jàppee daal la ñu bëgg njàng mu am na njëriñ trop parce que suñu yombalkat yi ku baax la moom ñun daa xamuñu woon dala ñun ñi dugguñu woon école xamuñu waaye léegi ñu ngi bind luy dugg ci ay ciment ñu ñëpp ñu ngi koy bind di bind ay leetal di joxe waaye ñun dañuy ñaan yàlla di yokku nag ku ñu yokk la ñu bëgg.
However, there is one major disincentive to going to school here. It's the other side of this swamp. Children from the neighbourhood risk snake and insect bites whenever they cross, and 2 have drowned in the last 5 years. But these mothers, with the increased confidence that comes with better education, are campaigning for action to make the routes safer. Adult literacy is one of the key themes of the Dhaka conference, along with 2 other goals which are seriously off target: access to life skills programmes and early childhood care and education. The conference has moved following the official opening to a Western-style hotel in the centre of Dhaka. The press and public are not allowed inside the conference room, so it's difficult to know who's sitting round the table. But at this press conference we get it confirmed that there's not a single government minister from Western Europe or North America.
While it is a slight disappointment, and I understand your question, I do not think we should assume that this means a lack of interest in education for all. There are, as you perhaps know, some conflicting meetings, unfortunately, going on in the world, particularly for development ministers right now, such as the meeting in Bali about climate change, and many development ministers are there and unfortunately not here. But I don't think it should be taken as a lack of interest.
Global political will must be maintained and increased if any of the education goals are to be achieved by 2015. And that will must be backed by substantial increases in aid. Development assistance for education shot up from $6.5 to $10.6 billion between 2000 and 2004. By the following year, the figure had sunk back down to $8.5 billion. Despite this and the lack of Western ministers, there's a sense of optimism amongst campaign leaders as the talking gets underway.
It has gone up and it decreased last year, but that is not a reason to be pessimistic, because there are a lot of things in pipeline. We are waiting the money to be dispersed from the British government, for instance. Gordon Brown has announced good money. We are quite optimistic in case of United States, which was not the case before. Japan was not a big player in the past, but now Japan is coming slowly to it. So these things are important.
It's not just a lack of commitment and cash that might threaten education for all. It's a shortage of teachers and professionals. 18 million need to be recruited to achieve universal primary education. 500,000 are needed in India alone. Ratios of pupils to trained teachers is 100:1 in Chad, Madagascar, Mozambique and Nepal. Finding teachers for remote mountain communities is an even greater challenge. The village of Urbis in the Indian Himalayas is 14,000 feet above sea level and only accessible after a steep and arduous climb. Villagers, of course, easily take it in their stride, and 1 or 2 even get a lift. For nearly half the year, however, no one goes anywhere. The village is cut off by snow. There is a state school, but teachers can only be found by allowing them to disappear over the winter and spring. Pragya has stepped in with a class and a teacher for all seasons. She's not fully qualified, but she is from the village and stays in the village.
जो इक्विपमेंट्स इशू किए स्कूल में एलएच में वो गवर्नमेंट स्कूल में नहीं होते हैं मैम, इसीलिए बच्चे यहाँ आने के लिए इंटरेस्ट होते हैं क्योंकि उनको खेलने के लिए भी सामान मिलते हैं मैम और साथ साथ में सीख जाते हैं. मतलब वहाँ पे ऐसे ही लेसन दे रहे हैं मैम और यहाँ पे साथ साथ में दिखा के उनको मतलब प्रैक्टिकली दिखा के पढ़ाते हैं और यहाँ खेलने भी देते हैं उनको और इंटरेस्ट बहुत होते हैं इनको.
There's resentment in the village that children have to follow a curriculum designed in the city on the plains.
बहुत बेहतर है क्योंकि यहाँ पर एक तो अपना वहाँ के गवर्नमेंट स्कूल में जो है इतना को उसकी ड्रोन की तरह जो उनको इतना मालूम नहीं है जो कोई चीज़ के बारे में मतलब उनको इतना मालूम नहीं होता. यहाँ पर जो हर चीज़ की अपना यहाँ का जो यक हुआ ऐसे कोई अपना गांव की जो भी चीज़ है उसके बारे में जो है पूरा ये फायदा दे रहा है. ये उनको ये इतना पता चल रहा है कि यहाँ पर ये सिखा रहा है.
The same complaint about the quality of education is heard across the valleys, and it's causing concern in almost every other developing country. But with such a big expansion in the quantity of education, there was bound to be a price to pay.
And it is true there are problems of schools being closed or of teachers being absent, or indeed of children being absent for all sorts of reasons. But again, I think that the general trend is positive. There are huge problems, I do not deny it, but the trend is positive and we should not lose sight of that.
There is no substitute to good quality education. There is no substitute because education should be of good quality, definitely. But realistically, we know that all the poor countries in the present circumstances are not going to deliver the best quality education or good quality education spontaneously overnight. That is not realistic. They will deliver education, but the demand for good quality education will remain there, and that is increasing, that is deepening. So they cannot ignore that demand. Like in the past, they used to hire untrained teachers. Even now, in most countries, the teachers are not very trained teachers. But in the future, it is very difficult for governments to ignore the demand that the proper trained teachers must be employed.
In this Himalayan village, there is education for all of the year. The village of Yotche demonstrates what can be achieved through a partnership between an aid agency and the state. 2 local teachers, both qualified, delivering the national curriculum, and a separate classroom providing lessons relevant to life in the mountains. Pragya has also set up a committee to ensure the education remains responsive to the community.
ये तो बहुत अच्छी बात है जी, जैसे हम लाहौल में सबसे बड़ा इलाका माना जाता था, जैसे प्राग्ञ वालों ने हमें देखो जी स्कूल लाए और जैसे पावन चक्की लाए, हमें तो बहुत खुशी की बात है। बच्चों में ऐसा है जी, जैसे 4 घंटे के बदले 6 घंटा पढ़े तो काफ़ी रुचि बढ़ जाते हैं, बच्चों का हौसला बढ़ते हैं, हर एक चीज़ ज़्यादा सीखते हैं। रोज़ से रोज़ पता लगता है कि इस स्कूल में नहीं पढ़ा है तो दूसरे स्कूल में पता लग जाता है कि हमें क्या सिखा रहे हैं।
When the snow comes, the power goes. But not in Yotche. This hybrid system provides electricity all the year round for both classroom and homework.
This is one of the highest windmill in the world. And it is one of the remotest areas in the Himalayas that we have tried to establish the windmill and tried to address the issues of the electrification in this area. And we have tried to tap the high wind intensity and the high wind speed.
Not today, you haven't?
Yeah, we actually, these are different phases. After wind, solar panels. There is no transmission losses here.
पढ़े लिखे का ही ज़माना है आजकल, जब पढ़े लिखे नहीं हो तो बेकार का ज़िंदगी है। मैं तो अच्छे उसी तमन्ने से बैठे हैं, अच्छे पढ़े लिखे बाप की तरह मुसीबत में ना फंसे और बच्चे जो खुद कमा के खा सके।
The family in a neighbouring home didn't want to talk to us, but they did want to sing about education. The song celebrates the achievements of a boy who finishes school and joins the army to serve his country. Back at the Dachau conference, there's discord. UNESCO would like donor countries to commit to specific amounts of aid, but there's resistance, led, we're told, by delegates from Japan and the United States. There's little likelihood of ensuring education for all by 2015 unless the money is guaranteed. The annual amount needed is $11 billion, according to the Global Monitoring Team, or $16 billion, according to the Global Campaign for Education. As the wrangling continues into the evening, there's a mood of despondency amongst campaigners, contrasting with the sense of optimism felt by some at the start.
We have been very disappointed, because few ministers of development countries attended this meeting. So it will very difficult to make any decision because, as usual, they come with their notebook not with their checkbook.
It's not just some of the rich countries causing the gloom, but the effort coming from developing nations. States in sub-Saharan Africa spend an average of 5% of their gross national product on education. Not enough, say global campaigners.
Really pessimistic, because one of the key issues is funding. And the reality is that most of these African countries I'm talking about put less than 10% of their national budget in education. And the last figures from the Global Monitoring Report tell that for literacy, only government put 1% of their education budget in literacy.
So it's not the developed countries giving aid, it's the countries themselves that need the aid.
The responsibility of achieving these goals is first those for the national governments. The responsibility, the highest responsibility to meet these goals are the governments, one, not donors. Donors can help and should help, but the first step should be made by the national government themselves.
Some developing nations can't win. Countries such as Malawi, Mozambique and Sierra Leone are under pressure to prioritise education and spend more on teachers, but they're being instructed to clamp down on public spending by the International Monetary Fund. The Global Campaign for Education would like to discuss the problem with the IMF leadership, but no one's turned up, adding to the feelings of frustration. After a delay of 6 hours, UNESCO leaders wearily hold their closing press conference for the few journalists who have stayed on. They announce that an agreement has finally been reached, but it does not commit any of the donor countries to provide the money needed to ensure education for all by 2015.
Director General, for 60 years the United Nations and then UNESCO have been making declarations, passing resolutions, issuing communiques about the need for global education. Do you have any confidence at all that finally words will turn into action and lead to education for all by 2015?
We are making progress. Developing countries are making progress. Nevertheless, if you ask me, all developing countries will be able to achieve all 6 goals. Of course, my answer is no, unfortunately. But more and more countries are conscious of mobilizing more domestic resources in order to make further advance. Therefore, it's not correct to say it's a total failure. It is not a total. It is not total success, but it is not a total failure either.
Encouragingly, developing countries did agree to commit at least 10% of their public expenditure to education. UNESCO emphasises what it calls the Dhaka effect, which has been felt in every corner of the world and increased school enrolment from 647 million to 688 million. The Global Campaign for Education singles out Cambodia, Cameroon and Timor-Leste for special recognition. The Global Monitoring Team applauds countries including Ethiopia, Guatemala and Lesotho for moving rapidly towards education for all.
I leave this meeting with mixed views. I've seen a recommitment or a restatement of the very strong commitment of the most of the developing countries at this meeting. And I've seen many donors who also have been very clearly indicating their strong and continued commitment. Where I leave it more worried is with regard to some of the goals, particularly the adult and youth literacy goal, where there seems to be less discussion and less commitment than with regard to the other goals, and with regard to the overall financing, which still remains inadequate, particularly from external aid.
Realistically, just 2 of the 6 goals may be reached. Ensuring all children have access to free primary education is a possibility, although it's unlikely all children will have completed primary education, the full ambition of the original goal. And there's a chance that gender disparities could disappear by 2015, although ensuring girls get equal treatment when they go to school may be difficult to achieve and hard to prove in many countries. As for the other 4 goals, there's no chance of success by 2015 or even by 2115, according to some more pessimistic commentators. So far, the drive for education has reduced the number of children out of school by 24 million. At least 72 million are still absent.
Promises to children should never be broken.